Well, it is significant, and it does increase the pressure on Netanyahu and his government. It's easy to say that it's just a token gesture because the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction over Israel. Israel is not a signatory to the court. 120 countries are, though. Now, this gives it real meaning because if this request for an arrest warrant is actually granted, and that has to be decided by 3 judges of the court. So far, we only have a request from the prosecutor. But if it is granted, then 120 countries will be under a legal obligation to arrest Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, if they set foot in those 120 countries' territory. So it does have meaning, it does have potential effect, and the court, although it's accused of grandstanding because it's obviously never going to get its hands on Netanyahu, even if it does issue an arrest warrant. But those 120 countries that are signatories and do constitute the ICC, the ICC is responding to them as a constituency itself. So it's an indicator, an index of international opinion of Netanyahu and the way he is prosecuting this war at a time when he's already under intense pressure at home. He's unpopular with the Israeli public. One of the 3 members of his war cabinet, Benny Gantz, is threatening to withdraw his support and leave the war cabinet, which would put immense pressure on Netanyahu. So this is not a good time for him and for the ICC to bring this request for an arrest warrant at the moment, or the prosecutor to bring this before the ICC at the moment, is a very unwelcome extra level of political pressure on Netanyahu.
It seems unwelcome too for the US. Joe Biden is already juggling a very difficult domestic climate. He's said this is an outrageous decision, but does it have to give the US some pause in terms of how it manages Israel and the way they are prosecuting this war?
I think it's another element of pressure on the Biden regime. We've already seen Biden really reach the end of his tether with Netanyahu's near contempt for consistent US requests for the way that he moderates his treatment of civilians in Gaza. And we saw that the threshold moment was when Joe Biden said that the US would stop supplying some classes of particularly heavy munitions, bombs, to Israel. That's by drawing that line in the sand, if you like, that's a clear indicator that Biden himself is under intense domestic pressure at home. And this ICC news just puts another layer of pressure onto Biden as well, at a time when, again, it's very unwelcome, as you said, for Biden. He's entering an election campaign, or for all intents and purposes, he's in an election campaign. And Netanyahu's conduct of this war is putting enormous pressure on Biden, especially on his left flank, which doesn't, in one sense, doesn't matter because those voters have nowhere else to go. They can't support Donald Trump. But they can. The ultimate sanction in US politics, of course, is for voters to stay home.
Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, has not really commented on this decision. How do you think Australia is going to continue to approach Israel? It too is under pressure here from a lot of pro-Palestinian demonstrators saying that it's not showing enough opposition to how Israel is prosecuting this war.
Yes, Anthony Albanese today really ran dead on this, trying to neutralise the story, not to give it any local oxygen from government, at least, by saying that I don't comment on court proceedings at home or abroad. But then he immediately went on to comment on the court proceedings against Julian Assange. So that's not really a consistent statement of principle, but more of convenience. It does indicate that he doesn't want to get into this question, the Israel-Gaza question. He does have a difficult job because his government, the composition of his government reflects the same sentiments that run through the community. Pro-Israel sentiments on one hand, pro-Palestinian on the other. And it's an uneasy situation. Generally, the government has, comments from within the government have been, especially from ministers, have been moderated and reasonable. But this is going to go on, this whole situation is going to go on for months and maybe years, Bev. You've got the war itself, of course, but then there's going to be negotiations, settlements, reconstruction, war crimes, trials, and so on and so on. So this is a very uneasy state of affairs for Albanese. He wishes the whole thing would go away, just as Joe Biden does, but it's not going to go away, and he might have to find a more structured way of managing opinion within his own government, because this is just going on and on and on.
Yeah. You talked of Julian Assange. It was quite an interesting decision by the UK giving Julian Assange the leave to appeal. It seems that the two judges in question, were not satisfied with assurances given by the US as to how he would be treated in the US. How might this, do you think, impact the ability for a diplomatic solution that the Australian government is pushing for with the US?
Well, it doesn't hurt the Albanese government's case. As you know, Albanese has been asking Biden, pressuring the US since he took office for 2 years, for a diplomatic deal to get the US to drop its extradition request. So this decision certainly doesn't hurt the Australian case and might help it slightly. It indicates that the degree of difficulty the US has in getting its hands on Assange is high and keeps rising. So it's probably a pro factor for getting a deal between Australia and the US. But on the other hand, it does protract this 13-year-old process, which no wonder Assange's health is suffering, because that's just a sentence all of its own.
Yeah, you do feel sometimes whether if he'd actually just gone through the due process by now, it would be all over.
Well, it may well have, especially if there'd been a plea deal in a US court, and that may yet be the ultimate outcome of this. The ultimate outcome might be that the US agrees with Australia that once it does succeed in extradition, it will agree to a plea deal, but we won't know until and unless that happens.
Yeah. Good as always to talk, Peter. Thanks so much.
Pleasure, Bev.